I always knew there was something, and I had an inkling that this wasn't right. He only had like 5 sounds. So told the Plunkett nurse, and she said, wait till he's 2. And then got to 2, he still only had the 5 sounds, and so went on to speech therapy to get that assessed. And they pretty much just put his behavioural issues down to the lack of speech, or delayed speech. Especially during kindy, I used to say to them, his eyes appear further apart, to which I got the response, no, he hasn't got Down syndrome. And I'm like, that's not what I said. I just always knew there was something, that it wasn't just speech, but I knew it wasn't ADHD. On thinking about it, there were signs back in the early days. You know, he wasn't socialising. He would be he'd be rough, but it was more of like he'd settle and he'd set up the train set and he'd just pretty much play with that all day. He didn't like to be touched. He had sensory issues. Brush past him and he'd think you've whacked him, so he'd turn around and whack you back. And they noticed that the behavioural was still going, and they actually wanted to test we got partway through the first year and they said, oh, can we test for ADHD? Which got my back up, and at first it was like, no, you can't. But then I talked to someone and they said they test for everything else. So I thought, okay, it's free. It's not going to, I'm not going to be put out. So I went with it, and they came back at the end of it with no definitive diagnosis. It was possibly autism on the spectrum, high functioning, but also strong markers for ADHD, but they couldn't decide what. There was sort of a few points missing, or some facial features that didn't fit in with autism, but all the other tests came back fine. Because they had no diagnosis, they couldn't pinpoint it. They wanted to wait 2 years till he was a bit older, and a few more things may manifest and come out or may change. He'll be a bit older. So it was a waiting game of 2 years of just putting things into place and trying to do the best we can, and hope that what we were putting into place was going to work or was helpful. And then they reassessed, started the whole process again. And I probably leading up to that got the most stressed before that than the first time. Just desperate for an answer by this stage. So they did that, and it was over Christmas, so we had to wait, and because they had a new social worker who wanted to get up to speed with the case and asked me a lot of questions and mentioned smoking, alcohol, and I again opened up and said, I drank a little bit, never got drunk, and she pretty much bounced on that and came back to me and said, what would you think if we said this? And that again got my back up, but part of me was sort of thinking, maybe, but we're all hoping that it wasn't. I had no knowledge about drinking when pregnant. We brought it up at the antenatal, and it was kind of not really touched on. It got moved on very quickly, and we moved on to something else. Midwife, I don't remember her ever saying anything. My friend around me was drinking, and she'd had kids before me. She had a kid the year before me, and we still drank, and so it was just sort of normal. We sat, chatted. I'd cut back during the pregnancy. I thought, well, I won't get drunk, so it should be fine. And I do not remember even thinking, could this affect the baby? I felt like I'd had my gut kicked in. Someone just punched me, and it was like, oh crap, which means it will be my fault. It's not just he's got this, it's I did this. So I had to wait a while between them saying that and getting the diagnosis. So even when we walked in to get the diagnosis, the fact that I saw the paediatrician and the social worker sitting there, I knew what they were going to tell me. They said FASD, which is partial fetal, but I'm not sure if they were saying that just to sort of lessen the blow. And when we first, because it was both me and my husband sitting there getting it, so we're driving home by ourselves, and I said to him, first thought to him was, do you blame me? To which he said, no, I don't, because I was there too. And, so he was there, he was seeing me drinking, so it's not like I did it behind his back. And he didn't know either. As soon as I got home, it was like jump on the computer and find out what I can, what is this? I had not heard of it. And I mean, I've worked with children, I've worked in the IHC growing up with my mum, and never had heard anything like this. I was prepared for anything other than that. So I researched, and the more I researched, and then coming up and doing a seminar with the Alcohol Watch, I realised probably that weekend that as a birth mother, I need to speak up. I can't just sit in a corner and pretend it didn't happen and just raise my child the best I can. I need to make people aware that it's not just the alcoholics, it's not just the binge drinking teenagers, it can be anyone of any age that can be affected. And it's a game of Russian roulette. You don't know which child or even which pregnancy of which person is going to be affected. I've had to be more aware of what he's doing. Like usually as your kid gets older, you give them a bit more independence. I see my friends' kids going to the shop. I was going to the shop when I was 7 from the same house we're living in. And I look at him and think, I can't send you to the shop just to get a bottle of milk or a packet of lollies, or even just to send him down. Even going for a bike ride around the corner it had to stop, because he'd go for a bike ride, he'd come back around the first time, the second time, but then he'd disappear. And he's gotten distracted, met up with someone, started talking. He thinks they're friends because they said they're friends. So the next thing, he's inside their house playing, and absolutely no stranger danger, has no idea. So constantly, can't let him go out and do independent things. Put it into relation of the future. Think of the future when you're thinking of having a drink, and what this child, look around at other people's children's and deal with the pressure of your friends not liking you or giving you grief for not drinking, or have a lifetime of this child being dependent on you. I think it's just a case of, you're pregnant, don't drink and risk that child's life that has no choice in what's happening to it. I have to look at my son every day and know what I've done, and I wouldn't put that on even my worst enemy. I've often thought about going back, if someone built a time machine, and I certainly would. I'd go back and said, actually I would have gone back with all the pamphlets, all the booklets, and I would have gone, don't. Sometimes I just want to go back and slap myself, but I can't.